and thank you for listening to the Conscious Tiva podcast. I'm Tatiana, and joining me today is Lama Rod Owens. Lama Rod is known as a Black Buddhist Southern Queen. He's a highly sought after Buddhist minister, author, activist, yoga instructor, and authorized Lama in the Kagyu school of Tibetan Buddhism. Lama Rod is also an international influencer and holds a Master of Divinity degree in Buddhist Studies from Harvard Divinity School. And he's here to discuss his latest book, The New Saints from Broken Hearts to Spiritual Warriors. Lama Rod has broken down some key aspects from the Buddhist traditions he has practiced and put them into his own words so the reader can tangibly apply these wisdom teachings. In this episode, we talk about what it means to be a disruptor, modern takes on the four yogas, and the four immeasurables in Buddhism that he calls the four sweet liberations. And we also talk about Mother Harriet Tubman as a saint, an ancestor, a guide, and a guardian who's really making herself known to a lot of us right now. And if you want to know more about Lama Rod, you can visit his website at lamarod.com. And you can also listen to his wonderful podcast that he co-hosts with Spring Washam called The Spirit Underground. I hope you enjoy this episode. It is filled with a lot of wonderful wisdom, and it was a really fun and enlightening conversation to have with Lama Rod. So thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much, Lama Rod, for being here today.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. So I don't know if you know this, but I first discovered you in Spring Washam's book.
Uh-huh.
Obviously we're not talking about Spring's book, we're talking about yours. But now retrospectively, I can see in the forward there's hints of what was to come with your book
Yeah.
in terms of, the freedom that you were writing about and your
Yeah.
connection. And
Mhm.
so I just wanted to begin with, you know, what is the spirit underground? Because you have this theme that crosses not
Mhm.
just in the forward of Spring Washam's book about Harriet Tubman, which I
Yeah.
always think of as being written with in conjunction with Harriet. Before we got on, I was literally like tuning in, and Harriet totally came into my meditation and
Oh,
was like guiding the session. And I actually held her book and then just put my hand on it. And then I just was like, I got all teary and I was like, oh my gosh, because she's so moving and she always says child, when she speaks to you, she always says, oh,
mm,
child. And it's so
mhm.
beautiful. So I literally wrote down the question. We're talking about your latest book, The New Saints
Yeah.
from Broken Hearts to Spiritual Warriors, which, as you can see, I've made a ton of notes on as well. And I thought that this book really represents our times, like meaning, you cut
Yeah.
to the chase. There's no BS in
Right.
the book, right? Like, and I
Right.
love the tone. I love how you're like
Mhm.
swearing throughout the book. You just get straight into it. You're just totally translating Buddhist practices into
Yeah.
straight up everyday language, which I thought was
Yep.
awesome. But what came to me in
Mhm.
terms of Harriet was, you know, I like, I didn't realize this connection and what a new saint was until I literally this morning picked up, you explained it in your book. So I wanted you to just begin with
Yeah.
explaining, what is this new saint? How is
Yeah.
Harriet Tubman somebody
Mhm.
that inspired you?
Mhm.
And, what is, she's a bodhisattva. What does that mean?
Right. Yeah. Well, really interestingly, Harriet was speaking to me while she was speaking to Spring, or when Spring was channeling her as she was writing her book, right? And we were having experiences of Harriet, but kind of separate experiences. Where Spring was downloading this book, Harriet was actually confirming something with me, right? As I talk about, in the forward to the spirit of Harriet Tubman. And for me, she was like, are you committed to this freedom work? And I was like, sure, yes, of course. And then she was like, okay, here's a name. Here's something for you. And she gave me this phrase, this title, Spirit Underground.
Mm.
And that was it. I got more insights into it in the moment, but she was like, this is what you're going to be doing. It's the Spirit Underground, you know? And I was like, cool, fine, you know? And then as I was thinking about my next book, which was The New Saints, for me, I was like, oh, this is an age where we're having to rethink who we are. as people committed to liberation, right? And
Mhm.
I have to rethink my role in this, right? And so from all of that, I really begin to bring together this whole vision, of what it means to get free, right? And to I guess to speak about freedom in a way that makes sense for us right
Yeah.
now, not in like kind of like hypothetical or theoretical language or super romanticized language around enlightenment, but what does liberation or awakening mean for us right now in this moment in our bodies in this particular time in the world,
Yeah.
right? And
Mhm.
how do I just get to the point, right? Because the energy of that book is the energy of Harriet Tubman, right? Harriet Tubman gets to the point. Like when she visits with you, it's like, I'm not here to bullshit. I'm not here, to have fun or to hang out. I'm here to work,
Mhm.
right? And if you look at her life, it was about the work of freedom, right? I think that's why so many people may feel overwhelmed reading our books, Spring and I's book, because like the spirit or the energy of abolition is really direct. It gets to the truth. Like
Yeah.
this is about getting free. And these are the choices we have to make. And those choices means that we have to give up things. We have to leave places. We have to risk our lives, right? And are we ready to do that right now? Because as Harriet often said, she was like, listen, I'm going to get free or die trying.
Yeah.
And that's it. Those are the choices, right? And
Mhm.
she also said that, like, it's better to die trying than to remain in bondage. I mean, that's intense, right? Like, we think that, like, we can just consent to oppression and to the violence and say, oh, everything's going to be okay. But what Harriet is actually telling us is that no, actually, that's not okay. It's better to die trying to get free from this than to consent to being consumed by this, right? Because as a bodhisattva, right, she understands the cycle of birth and rebirth and death and everything. Like, she's like, the more you consent to the suffering, the deeper you get pulled into this cycle, right? And we're trying to transcend this cycle to remember who we are,
Yes.
right?
Totally.
So all of that's in the book, like all of that, that's the spirit that I was actually adding to the book. And my book is in conversation with Spring's book as well,
Yeah,
because
it feels like
Spring
that.
finished, yeah, and and she finished hers and got hers out before mine, but we would talk as we were writing. We
Mm.
had just like this period where she was completing the writing of her book and I was in the middle of writing New Saints, and so we had that time where I could I really consciously just started kind of talking to Spring's book as I
Yeah.
completed my manuscript.
I mean, it's so interesting because having read both books, I can
Mm,
totally see that. And like I said before, it didn't occur to me till this morning.
yeah,
And I went back and I literally went through, and then I was like, oh, wow, okay.
yeah,
Like, I totally get it. Like, I can
mhm,
now, having then gone through your whole book, go, all
mhm,
right, so Spring is reminding us of those times, and
yeah,
she's channeling it. Spring is channeling
mhm,
it, and the stories she's retelling, they're so real and visceral. I mean, the
yeah,
experiences, there were moments when I was
yeah,
like, holy
oh,
I
yeah,
actually said to Spring, oh my God, I couldn't, like, I was, how could you handle
yeah,
these experiences?
yeah,
Because they were so real moving through you, the
mhm,
memories and the
mhm,
imagery and the spirits and the unseen beings and everything. Like, you were fully immersed in this. It was
yeah,
beyond embodying, right? It was like
exactly,
very real. And then
mhm,
you're bringing forward an interpretation of the times we're living in. We're still living
mhm,
in this bond, these times of
mhm,
bondage. It's just a
yeah,
different version of it. And
exactly.
so you're now so share some of that. I'm not gonna like, I'm not gonna talk you talk about your book, because I
Yeah,
got so much out of it. And there, let me just go. I literally wrote down so many questions. I wrote them in chronological order because I didn't want to miss stuff. But as you
yeah,
know, as you start talking, just things, the conversation leads
yeah,
itself.
yeah,
Um, so, I mean, the biggest thing, obviously, you're a disruptor, right? You're a disruptor, and
right,
this is a theme that's
mhm,
coming through the entire time. So, what does
yeah,
it mean to be a disruptor or disruptive, especially now?
yeah. Yeah, this kind of skillful disruption. I think truth is disruptive, right? And that's what I'm doing. I'm just telling the truth, right? And more importantly, I'm telling my truth, right? This is my truth. And I don't think we're used to that anymore. I think where a lot of people are just performing their way through life, they're just accommodating people. People aren't as authentic as they need to be, right? But when I show up, when someone like me shows up and says, okay, here's this book, and I'm going to tell you the truth, I'm going to invite you into these experiences, right? And I'm going to walk with you. Like that's disruptive, right? And I think that's kind of the feedback that I often get so far with the book. It's just like it's a lot, you know, but it's just my truth, and I'm not holding back with that because this is no longer a time of holding back. Again, this is the spirit of Harriet Tubman. It's just like this is Harriet Tubman isn't we're not playing around here. Like freedom is real serious. Like you have to get serious about it. And that's scary, because that seriousness means that we tell the truth. We tell the truth primarily about how we're suffering
Yes.
and where we're suffering, right? And that we have so self-identified with the suffering. And that's one of I would say the first thing that we need to get free from is
Yeah.
the self-identification with the suffering itself. That's not who we are,
Yeah.
right?
Well, talk about that more because
Mhm.
they're so intrinsically connected, right?
Yeah.
Suffering, understanding the truth of who we are, and
Yeah.
being able to liberate ourselves
Yeah.
to the truth, to get back to
Yeah.
the truth of who we are. So
Exactly.
expand, like, because I always say, we choose suffering. We
Yeah.
choose it. We don't even realize.
Yeah.
As humans, we choose to
Exactly.
suffer. And when I say that to people, they're sort of like, "Well, what do you mean? Like, why would I
Yeah.
choose suffering?" I'm like, "Yeah, but you do, and you don't even realize it."
Yeah.
So, can you break that down?
Yeah. Exactly. Like we are choosing suffering because this isn't who and what we are, right? Suffering is an experience, right? Like, and that's like one of the really strong teachings here is like I have to start relating to suffering as an experience, right? Not inherently who I am. Like I am not suffering. I am experiencing suffering. However, when you say you're experiencing, it gives suffering space to change, right? And then when you look at into Buddhism, the Buddha taught that like, attachment, craving, fixation is the root of suffering. We get attached to things, we crave things, right?
Mhm,
And so in that way, we're choosing suffering. We're choosing it because that's the only thing that we think we know, but also it's what feels familiar, you know. Unfortunately for so many of us, if we're not experiencing suffering, then we don't know who we are. Like we don't have an experience of ourselves outside of suffering, right? And so that's why we keep choosing suffering in that way because we think that's how we define ourselves. The struggle around suffering gives us a meaning,
mhm,
you know? And to choose, the opposite of suffering, which would be, not necessarily joy or pleasure, but the absence of suffering, or we choose spaciousness over the struggle and the intensity of suffering, then like we actually begin to figure out a more truthful expression of who we are. But I think it's a hard thing for people to hear, oh, you're choosing suffering, and that's why I think my book, The New Saints, can be so jolting for people. It's because, oh, actually, I'm reminding people that they have agency to do something different, right? You can process through or metabolize the suffering in order to start releasing it.
mhm.
But that means you will change. And are you ready to change? Right? Are you ready to figure out who you are beyond the suffering? Because that's going to look completely different than what's happening right now as you're fixated with the suffering and to the suffering.
Mhm. And I'd love for you to just give a couple of examples. You give
Yeah.
them in your book. You use one about you used the phrase cult,
Yep.
but you're not necessarily referring to a group of people following an
Right.
individual. That is what most people's
Mhm,
definition of a cult is. But you
mhm,
give some other great modern day examples of this. So could you just share a couple of those, how we're consumed, how we choose suffering? Because the suffering is real, is
yeah,
not just a meme.
yeah, yeah. Well, we choose suffering like, some examples that I use in the book is that, you know, we really we're fixated to comfort, and we're very loyal to comfort, and that loyalty to comfort means that we overconsume.
Mhm.
We do what feels convenient, you know, and that convenience comes at a detriment, right, to other communities, to the environment, right? When we get involved in like I would say this kind of not a consumer culture, but like a quick kind of like I want things now culture, and
Yeah,
what we
quick fix culture.
sacrifice. Yeah, you know, and we sacrifice so much to have everything that we want whenever we want. So we sign up for, our like online shopping apps and we buy things that actually aren't sustainable or good for the environment only because it's quick. It's gratifying, it's instant gratification, right? And that's because we have this loyalty to comfort. And so what I often say in the book is that we have to choose this comfort
Mhm.
in order to start disrupting our fixation to comfort. Because getting free isn't comfortable. Like there's a struggle in getting free because we're having to figure out who we are. And to figure out who you are, you have to kind of cut through fixation and attachments that will feel very painful, right?
And I like how also in the book you're reminding the reader that those actions, that not only are they affecting you, unbeknownst to you perhaps, but your
Mhm.
relationship to others.
Yep,
Have it
exactly.
expand on that a little bit.
Mhm.
How, when we're in this place of discomfort that we're
Yeah,
not even aware of,
yeah.
we haven't learned to tune into it yet.
Mhm,
How can that potentially affect other people in our lives or
mhm.
that we just encounter day to day?
Yeah. I mean, because what we're doing is just kind of bypassing suffering, right? And when you bypass suffering, you're losing this incredible opportunity to empathize. Like, so when I bypass my suffering, it becomes easy for me to bypass other people's suffering or to erase other people's suffering. And that's a loss of a deep sensitivity to people around me and to the communities that I live in, right? So you start in a way floating above your suffering, right? And we think that's getting us somewhere, but it's not, right? It's just this experience that we've manipulated to create to make us feel good about ourselves and everything around us. I think, we look at the world right now, and I think a lot of us, we hold these views about the struggles of other folks because we're not actually paying attention to our own struggle. So when you're not again paying attention to your struggle or tuned to your suffering, then it's easy to get real judgmental about other people and what they're doing as they're trying to be in tune with their suffering, right? And so much, so many times in my life, when I really started committing to my own experience of suffering and working through it, people would judge me and criticize me all the time. And they would be like, Rod, why are you like, you know, why are you doing all this stuff? Like, why are you so concerned with suffering? Why is this the only thing that you're doing? And I kept saying, well, because this is the only way I'm going to get free from this.
Mm.
Like, I have to deal with the trauma and the depression. I have to deal with the impact of, systemic racism on me. Like, I have to ask those questions and then gather the resources I need to heal, right? And it looks messy. It looks, you know, unstable and out of control, but that's what liberation looks like,
Yeah.
right? And if you're wanting to look good, and to have a social media moment in your, suffering liberation, it's never going to happen, right? And I think that people are just like also really terrified of that.
Yeah.
You know, they don't know, they can't possibly fathom the experience of falling apart
Yeah.
and the
Yeah.
safety, of falling apart, right?
Mhm.
But there's no other way. Just in the same way, Harriet Tubman, when she talks about leaving the plantation, there was no guarantees, right? Like she had never left the plantation. She didn't know how to read, like many enslaved people and poor people in general, right? Like there were no guarantees. And in the same way, when we start, working with our suffering, who knows what's going to happen? But again, in the spirit of Harriet Tubman, it's better to try,
Yeah.
right, than to not.
In the spirit of Harriet as
Mhm,
well, and it's the theme of your book too, as you said,
mhm,
it when we learn to trust, to come back to ourselves,
yeah,
you can start to we come into this place of realization
yeah,
where it doesn't matter if we don't know the way, we
yeah,
don't know the path. Like
yeah,
Harriet instinctively trusted. She was shown the path. She was shown the
right,
way, quite
right,
literally in her mind, and then
right,
trusted this guidance.
yeah,
And we in the modern world have just learned
mhm,
to shut so much of that out because of all this
mhm,
exterior
mhm,
stimulation or whatever it
mhm,
is, right? So,
mhm,
you have a lot of really great techniques that you have interpreted from
mhm,
the Buddhist tradition, from your
mhm,
tradition. And
mhm,
the yogas, the 4 yogas, for example.
yeah,
Can you break this down, your version of these 4 yogas?
mhm, mhm,
There's so much sweetness in the practices that
right,
you share in here.
mhm, mhm. And so, when I was thinking about setting up this kind of framework of the 4 yogas, for me, it was really trying to focus and organize like the main kind of thematic practices.
And I just wanna quickly interrupt. We're not talking about asana practice here.
No, mm-mm.
We're not talking about
And
physical yoga.
mhm. And absolutely, because that's a really good point to make, because yoga doesn't necessarily mean physical practice. It means philosophies. It means like things that we engage in order to remember union, to experience union, which is a coming back together or a remembering
Mhm,
of ourselves. That's the heart of yoga, and then the asanas are one expression, of how to bring things back into union. And so the 4 yogas of the new saint are just the ways that we're bringing the work back into focus, into union, right? And the 4 yogas are the yoga of dream, clarity, work, and care, right? So the first yoga of dream is really important. It's like we have to like imagine what freedom feels like and looks like. That's the dream. Who are we liberated? Who what do our communities or what does the world look like in the liberated sense?
yeah,
Where and when I talk about liberated and the relative, I'm talking about what kind of world would we have if everyone had access to the things that they needed? To the communities that they needed to be a part of, to all the resources for their wellness, to have what they need, not necessarily have a lot more than what they need, or to have a world where wealth and resources aren't concentrated, in just one small group of folks, where all those resources are redistributed, right? And what kind of space and time could that awaken for us to really devote to spiritual liberation,
mhm,
right? So that's the dream. You have to get clear about what you're working towards. And the second yoga is clarity, and clarity is about getting clear about what the nature of all this is. you know, I can't have a dream if I don't believe that things can change. And so the yoga of clarity is about really understanding that the nature of everything is change. And how do I get into that change and get clear, right? And then the third yoga is the yoga of work, right? I have to figure out what the practice is to get there. It's all well and fine to have a dream, it's all well and fine to get clear, but what is the actual work that I'm doing? Like, what am I choosing to do? And what's the praxis? What's the procedure?
mhm,
Right? And we, again, for me, Buddhism is nothing but practice and clarity to get us, into this awakened dream. And then the last yoga is the yoga of care. And this is like getting, clear about what we need to do work, to get clear, to have the dream. What is it? What are the resources, right? And how do I actually experience care as an individual? And how does my community or how does our collective experience care, right? You can't get free depleted,
Mhm.
right? When you choose to get free, you have to be resourced to do that. You have to have the energy, right? So I wanted with this last yoga, I just wanted people to really understand that depletion isn't this value that should be celebrated. you know I know that for some people, there's people who live in intense abundance. They just have so much, right? And I can understand like the resistance to that. But because you have a lot of resources, that doesn't mean that you're actually resourced, that you actually are taking in the energy of these resources and feeling restored, right? And this is what I'm trying to get at in the yoga of care. How do we feel restored? And if you do feel restored, then like you'll learn that like you can give away, you can redistribute
Yeah.
the access resources that you have freely, and that's what's happened. I think that's a shift that I think we're going to be moving into, is that like those who have a lot of resources are going to understand that they have to start redistributing those resources, because there are people who need care, like
Yeah.
who need access to those resources that they're maybe hoarding.
You know, what I like about your interpretation
Mhm,
using the word care, and I say
mhm,
interpretation because for me it felt like in that section you were describing
mhm.
yoga or bhakti, this
Yeah,
of
bhakti,
like
yep,
opening, let's get in touch with our opening our heart space,
yeah,
which in, sort of the yogic traditions,
mhm,
whether it's Buddhist tantric traditions or Vedic traditions, there's a lot of language that doesn't necessarily translate into the English vocabulary.
yeah,
And even bhakti, most people in the
mhm,
West assume that that is like a physical heart opening
right,
practice, but it
right,
isn't. So I really loved that you took that and you broke it down into actually this nurturing aspect of care and compassion and getting in touch. How do we get in touch with this heart space so we can share, as you just said, our resources and actually tune into what the needs of others
yeah,
versus
exactly.
ourselves.
Mhm,
So similarly, you have another section in the book called The Four Sweet Liberations.
mhm.
And when I first read that heading, to be honest, I thought it was going to be a take on the four immeasurables from Buddhism. I was like, oh, but actually, it's like this like s- gratitude practice on steroids. So can you break down like this is wonderful. You have like the four sweet liberations.
Mhm,
It's really cool. And then you have the practices in here like
mhm,
you talk about it like it's awesome. I love these with leisure and
mhm,
beauty
mhm.
and pleasure, opulence, like people
Yeah,
don't associate those words with
exactly.
a spiritual practice.
Yeah. Well, this is like really probably my favorite chapter in the book, because it's such a creative way. As you pointed out, yeah, the four immeasurables, well, that's where it comes from,
Okay.
right? That's exactly where it started. And I thought, oh, I love the four immeasurables, right? But how do I translate the four immeasurables for people like me who are coming from, a reality where we've been really deeply depleted by systems, and institutions? Because again, like I said, I don't think liberation is about depletion. I think it's about restoration. And I
Yeah.
think there are really specific energies that we need to really absorb and take in, right? And so the four sweet liberations are also a tribute to someone who I consider an elder, even a fairy godfather for me at this point, who which is Andre Leon Talley,
He was awesome.
who a beautiful person, like just one of the the pioneers, well, for he was a pioneer, absolutely, but, like, he was one of the first, like, Black gay men who was really visible in fashion as a journalist, as a thinker, as a philosopher. He's just this brilliant person, and
Do
who I
know,
used to
don't you miss his articles in Vogue every month? Like,
I'm
don't you miss
I
reading
miss
those? Oh my
I
gosh,
miss his
so
articles.
much.
I miss, like, just the wisdom. I miss, like, just seeing him in an interview where he's just, like, out
Yeah,
there,
yeah, yeah, he
you
was so
know,
awesome.
these big words and, like, this intense kind of, like, commitment to these, and I think people misunderstood Andre quite a bit. For me, he taught me that I had a right to beauty, that I
Mm,
didn't just have to just accept ugly things, that I had this capacity to change thing. So his for me, his work wasn't about consumption, right? It was really about how do I appreciate
mm,
like resources that I have, right? So this four sweet liberations is that it is also something that I wanted to write directly to my community, to the Black, queer, and trans community, and to say, you know what, we have a right to experience this. As often as I'd say in the chapter, like I love nice things, absolutely, and it's not that necessarily I wanna have all the nice things in the world, right? But I wanna feel what it feels like to be appreciated and treated like a luxury item,
mm.
right?
Love that. Yeah,
You
yeah.
know? I bought, like when I finished the book last year, I went to, I had a trip to New York, and we went to Bergdorf's, which is a high-end fashion, department store with some friends, and I bought this really expensive luxury bag. And I've never bought anything like that before, and I was, like, really nervous that something could be that expensive and could be easily stolen or lost, but that exemplified that illustrated something really important. It's like, no, I want to be treated like an expensive bag, not to be used and thrown over my shoulder, but I want to be revered. I want to be respected. Like, I wanna be worthy, and so these practices around pleasure and opulence, and beauty and leisure, this is about opening to these energetic experiences so we can experience restoration. I don't think anything's wrong with that, because
Yeah,
I'm not telling you to go out and buy expensive cars and whatever. I'm telling you to open to these energies that are already present around us. Like,
yeah,
beauty is everywhere, and this is what Andre taught me. Beauty is everywhere,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
Like, I
It's
can
like a practice of
rest.
awe almost,
Yeah,
like very similar to a practice of awe where you
yeah,
get affected in such a way for momentarily where you're like
yeah,
this the rapture of the beauty of the thing.
exactly. Like, sympathetic joy, as we would say in Buddhism, is like when I experience something really powerful and moving, I wanna offer that to others. I want everyone to experience the beauty that I'm experiencing right now,
Mm.
right? I want people to feel opulent, you
I
know?
love that. Like, who doesn't
I'm
want to feel opulent, really? I mean,
No, exactly.
that's what I thought when I'm like, oh, like,
Yeah.
oh.
And opulence is different for everyone, right? Again, it's not about going out and just acquiring all this expensive stuff, but like for me, it's a shift in how I think about myself,
Mm,
right? I can be these things, I can experience these things, and this is helping me to expand, to open, to heal, right? So I no longer walk through the world just feeling just depleted and devalued. Like I have this sense of value for myself. You're right, and I think again, this is what Andre was teaching us, you know?
sometimes I put on sequin pants just to no one's around.
That's
Put on
it.
sequin pants because
Yeah.
they look fabulous. They're shiny and glittery and
Mhm.
the light hits them and I just walk around, and I'm like sit in them for an hour. I mean, God, they stick to everything. They catch on stuff, but but I
Exactly.
feel fabulous in them for like, and then I'm like, okay, I'm done now. And I take them off and put them away. And I just
Yeah.
got my sillies out and I got in tune with whatever that
Mhm.
was. And it
Exactly.
made me feel good. And then on with it.
Yeah. Exactly, like, or doing something nice for yourself, like, having a nice meal, like,
Mhm,
once in a while. I mean, stuff like that. That's like I'm really trying to get us to do simple things like that, and things that don't cost a lot of money. Again, just for me, sitting out on my porch, just listening to the birds or just feeling the wind. It's just simple things. And this is what, again, Andre always talked about. Like, just like there's beauty everywhere. How do we open to that? Because the more we open to these energies, the more we can offer these energies. Like, the more I feel opulent, the more I can help others feel opulent or beautiful, you
mhm.
know?
Yeah, yeah. You talk about it throughout the book,
Hmm.
and you mention it specifically, unseen beings,
Yeah.
but how you always felt them around you,
Hmm.
even as a child.
Hmm.
Why is it important that we get to know these unseen beings? And I
Yeah.
think it's also really critical that this becomes a normal part of everyday
Yeah.
conversation because people think you're crazy if you start to talk about them. But
Exactly.
beyond that, why is it
Yeah.
important for a deeper reason beyond
Yeah.
not being thought of as crazy?
Exactly. Because we're living in an ecology. Like, we're living amongst different kinds of beings, right? And it doesn't even have to be like spirits or unseen beings. They can be insects that we're like things that we just don't see, right? That's what I'm trying to get at. Like, we're amongst this like really complex ecology, both seen and unseen, and we can actually be of benefit if we learned, if we actually developed a sensitivity to how we're living with other beings, right? How we're living with the earth and on the earth, right? How we're living in spaces that are super populated with beings, right? And how those beings actually have an impact on our lives. I think that for me, I felt always very fortunate because this was never something like I did not believe, and I always felt this. As I've grown older, I've developed the capacity and the agency to be in relationship consciously with the unseen world. But I think the unseen world is such an important resource for us, right? We start developing sensitivity to the beings we're living with in our homes or on the lands that we're living on. And when we start developing that relationship, we start figuring out what beings need. And then that begins a shift in the quality of our lives. And this is what every indigenous community around the world is connected to, right? And I think when institutions and systems like capitalism and colonialism, which brings about slavery and so forth, I think these institutions, these systems disconnect our relationship to the unseen. And in order to bring, I would say, the climate back into balance, we have to return back to this kind of indigenous worldview, this animistic, kind of worldview, which means for me that like everything can be an expression of consciousness, that everything can be conscious in a way. And if I can bring that respect to just objects like my house,
Yeah,
I feel is very conscious. If I can understand that, then my quality of living actually increases, it deepens. Like, my home can be a partner with me in creating safety and creating an environment where I feel really held,
yeah,
and cared for, instead of just this inanimate object that I can just do wherever I want to. I'm living within, this conscious being within an ecology within its walls. And like for me, that worldview just feels really grounding and really restorative. It's just not just it's more than just me trying to figure out how to live and to survive. I can collaborate with other beings and I can also create boundaries,
yes.
where I need to for beings who are actually creating suffering
Well,
and
expand on
obstacles.
that because you do talk about that a little bit in the
Hmm.
beginning when you
Hmm.
when you first open up the book, you're sitting there
Yeah.
and you're looking and
Yeah.
you're observing the spirits of deceased, not just ancestors,
Yeah.
but also
Hmm.
interesting. You mentioned, not I think not the redcoats, but someone like
What a
soldiers of
Confederate.
some sort,
Hmm.
people walking by,
Yeah.
and you can they're
Yeah.
tangible, you know,
Yeah.
explain how when we start to tune into those energies, if we
Yeah.
have awareness, and also if it's
Mhm.
if you're listening and you're a
Mhm.
young person who sees these things and are told
Mhm.
they're
Yeah.
imaginary, they're not,
Yeah.
they're very real. So I'd love for you just to, bring that together. We have
Exactly.
different aspects. We've got nature
Mhm.
being, and you go the second half of your book, you go
Mhm.
into it with deities
Yeah.
and the elements and
Mhm.
even nature beings to some degree here.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And to pick up just one of the threads there before I get into the rest of it, there are a lot of people who see and experience, we may call them intuitives and mediums and empaths and so forth. But if you're if this is something that feels as if it's really disrupting for you, or you may feel as if it's an expression of a mental illness, which is often what we get, I would really encourage you to create community and to establish relationships with other intuitives,
Mm.
and this is what I did personally. When I started having these experiences, I just started reaching out to other friends or creating new relationships with people who were themselves intuitives. And so whatever I experienced, I could just take it to them, right? And say, okay, what's your feedback? What are you feeling? Right. And that's how I kind of stay in line with what I'm experiencing. But where I live, I live in Atlanta, Georgia, which is traditionally, the ancestral lands of the Creek, Muskogee, and Cherokee people. This land also was Civil War. There's a lot of Civil War activity in the neighborhood that I live. And so one of my core experiences is feeling, you know, like the spirits of Confederate soldiers. Not just Confederate soldiers, but there are other kinds of beings too here as well. And as I talk about in the book, yeah, I can feel that. I can see that. And just to like reiterate this point, like I have one of my neighbors who's also as a teacher of mine and also a friend. She was like, "Thank you for writing this because this confirms what I experience, in our neighborhood as well." And to realize, yeah, there are these beings here, and I may not agree with the choices that they made, but I also know that beings can change, right? And so much of my practice is just being kind, and offering what I can to these spirits. And of course, I've learned how to help, earthbound spirits transition into the spirit world. So I do that work, pretty often with spirits and so forth. But that's what it means to remember. Of course, I occupy this position of shaman, right? Which is just something that's happened, over the years. Like that's something that Spring and I really connected over as the like. And she was really the first person who was like, Rod, you're a shaman. you know?
I love
I was
that.
like, "No, I'm a Buddhist teacher." She was like, "No, like and she started introducing me as a powerful shaman, particularly when we were doing work in the Amazon, in South America. And I was like, "Oh, okay, that's exactly what I do then," you
Yeah.
know? But we have to start remembering our capacity to be in tune with the unseen world because that's the frontier. Like that's the next frontier for us is to remember,
Mhm.
right? That there's much more happening than what we can see or hear,
Yes.
and to trust our intuition. I think for many of us, for many of us, we were taught to distrust our intuition, right? I think we have to reclaim that and we reclaim it with the help of communities.
Yes. Well, even your ancestor practice in the book
Yeah.
is a really great ancestor
Yeah.
practice. You also share that beautiful guided journey, the one that you
Yeah.
did. I think it sounds like Harriet came to you first, spoke to you, and then you went with Spring and had that really intense journey with plant medicine.
Hmm.
But then you share this amazing ancestor practice, which is so beautiful. And
Hmm.
I mean, I think there's a reason we're seeing a lot more books coming out on ancestor work and how to
Yeah.
connect now, because this is
Yeah.
I think it's in the collective, right? Where there's a
Yes.
reason, like we need to start to learn, and ancestor work
Hmm.
is really another way of saying
Yeah.
connect with the spirit realm.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think that particularly for activists who have been doing a lot of work for many years, like I think they're beginning to understand that, that ancestor work is actually really quite powerful to bring about the changes that we want to see because our ancestors hold the past, right? And they are asking for collaboration and partnership. And that my ancestor practice has completely changed my life, right? As I talk about in the book in that chapter. But for me, like, I just feel so much more complete and whole, having developed a really strong, consistent ancestor practice and veneration. I feel like I feel protected. I feel guided, right? And I also feel, as I talk about in the book, I've been able to do this really intense work of cleansing for my ancestors because it becomes harder in spirit form to
Yeah.
do certain kinds of healing. And that's why the living partner with ancestors or partner with spirits because we have the capacity to assist spirits, in healing, you
Yes.
know. I think that's just an amazing opportunity for us to practice deep care for
Mhm.
not just for our ancestors, also for ourselves.
Well, this is the real self-care, the real
Yeah,
work of self-care. It's not
yeah,
the fluffy, go take a bath and
right.
whatever. Like
Yeah,
this is the real self-care.
yeah,
Like this is,
yeah.
and
And
it
and mhm,
transcends. Like it
yeah,
transcends the barrier, the realm, the
exactly.
veil.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And I think really like tangibly, like I often tell people if you're having a lot of issues in your family, then I would actually look towards your ancestors. A lot of things that, people struggle with in their families and they can't articulate why. And I think those situations are often rooted within ancestry. Ancestral cleansing, which is an old, ancient, practice, indigenous practice, is really powerful to do is when we go back and we start actually unlocking and moving trauma within our ancestors. And that has a direct impact on our living family at
Yes.
the same time,
Yeah.
right?
So can you share a couple of I don't call them tips, but your ancestor practice?
Yeah.
Um, because there's some great, and I mean, an altar sounds like
Yeah.
an easy thing to set up, but
Hmm.
often people don't know, like they don't trust their guidance, their intuition on
Yeah.
what to get, where to place things. So maybe
Yeah.
just share a little bit about how to do that, an ancestor
Yeah.
altar.
Well, yeah, I think to even start an ancestor altar, I think first I really encourage people just to start talking to their ancestors. And I think that's the hardest thing to start with, but it's the most important thing. Just start talking and then asking for the ways in which your ancestors are communicating with you. And I think many ancestors are already communicating with us, but we just don't know what that communication looks like. And for me, early on, I began to understand that my ancestors were speaking to my body,
Mm,
through sensations. And so when I would say certain things or ask for certain things, and I would begin to notice sensations, certain sensations, I was like, okay, great, let's start there, right? And then over time, it's like you begin to develop an intuition about how to set up space within your home because an altar is how we kind of concentrate and channel energy into our living space. In another way, the ancestral altar is where our ancestors live in our home. That's their space, their spot. And I think just like even starting with a picture or several pictures of people who've passed on that we felt very close to and connected to begin with. Not people that we struggle with, not people that we had ambiguous relationships with, but people we deeply loved,
mhm,
right? And we had a really good relationship. Start just putting their pictures up, and then from there, maybe once a week, offering food, in that area or, whatever it may be that you set up. It doesn't have to be this huge area in your home. It can be just a mantle. Like I have like different kind of like mantles in my home. I just set up pictures there and just offer food there,
mhm,
right? Or a little table, somewhere or a shelf, like the one in back of me, right? Which is really dedicated to practice. Just really simple things like that. You just want to think about these beings and offer to them. And over time, the communication begins to deepen and you start getting really clear insights into what they're asking you to do, or clear insights into what they're needing, you know. And it's collaboration. They need things and I need things, and together you get your needs met. And it's powerful. As one of my elders said that, like, if you take care of the ancestors, they will take care of you. And I would just say that there are some, a lot of books and novels in the world are really just writers talking about their ancestors. We think they're fiction, you know, but I think some of the greatest works of literature have been an author telling the stories
Mm,
of their ancestors, and that's the most important offering we make to our ancestors. We tell those stories.
yeah.
So think about that for those of you who are listening. Maybe your favorite fiction book, is actually a writer talking about their ancestors,
Mm.
not just these made up characters.
Yeah. Yeah, because often book writing is a
Yeah,
channeling, a process of
exactly.
channeling. Yeah. So that for sure the inspiration is coming through. Yeah,
Oh
I
yeah,
love that.
absolutely.
I don't have a lot of photos
Hmm.
of my grandparents as ancestors,
Hmm.
and so for what I did on my altar space for my ancestors is I have, you can get like quartz crystals that are
Oh yeah.
carved into
Hmm.
angels, and
Hmm.
so I have four, and they sit around a little shell that's filled with rice grains and some dried flowers,
Hmm.
and I light a candle for them, and
Yeah.
they represent, I imagine all of my ancestors going down in the lines, those that came
Yeah.
before me.
Hmm.
And so that was how I intuitively felt guided to honor them, because I didn't have photos of everybody that I wanted to put there.
Right.
Just wanted to add that in case anyone doesn't have actual photos. It's
Yeah.
okay. You don't need a picture
It's
necessarily.
okay.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Even an
absolutely.
item, a favorite item, maybe it was a brooch that your
Exactly.
grandmother wore, something that
Yep.
honors them, even a button
Mhm.
that fell off a jacket, it doesn't matter. You
Or
know,
even like their names written on a slip of paper and placed up. Just anything,
yeah.
like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What I wanted to also ask you about is you've got your interpretation of the Vedic fire ceremony. I
Hmm.
really loved that. They tell you, oh, you've got to do it this way.
Yeah.
It has to, you need the Havana. You've got to have it this way. It's got to be set
Hmm.
up in a geometric pattern.
All
And
right.
you know what I mean? And I'm like, really? Can I just make a fire and
Mhm.
you know so I love how you have this in here. Why is it important to connect with the
Yeah.
element of fire? How does this affect us physically and
Mhm.
also spiritually?
Mhm. Yeah, I talk about connecting to all the elements, and for me, fire is really powerful for me because that's w- w- just looking at like the course of human development and civilizations and so forth. Fire has been incredibly important, not just as like light or as cooking, but as a way that we communicate. This is the way that we transmute substances, and then in that transmutation, direct the energy of those substances to the work that we want to get done. This alchemy, we need fire, you know, that element of fire to bring about alchemy, that transmutation, the transformation from one substance to another, the purification of fire, right? Fire is always reminding us, that like there's always light, there's clarity, right? And so develop a relationship with fire means that like I'm also connecting to the ways in which fire is also an important element within my own body, and that I have to tend to that fire in my body in the same way that I tend to a ceremony fire,
Mhm.
as well. And we honor fire. And I think that we're living in this, kind of like age where many people, not all of us, but many people have lost their reverence for the elements and the
Mhm.
power of the elements and the wisdom of the elements. And we have to return back to that because the elements are out of balance, and they're out of balance because we've lost attention and reverence for the elements. We don't tend to the elements like our indigenous ancestors did, right? We've lost that. And so we have to return back. And for me, sitting by the fire or sitting by the water or being wrapped up in wind or lying on the earth, these are the things that remind me that I'm an expression of these elements and that I am a caretaker of these elements as well. That we have to live in collaboration and in harmony with these elements. But the earth is reminding us climate instability, is reminding us that we're not in a balanced relationship with the elements, right? And this is the work that we're called to return back to, right? So I think there's real magic that's awakening for a lot of people right now,
Mhm.
because that's how the universe works,
Mhm.
right? The
Mhm.
universe functions on balance, right? And we're coming back into balance. It's painful, but we're coming back. No choice.
So then how can you create, like, say you don't have access to building a fire outside or a fireplace.
Yeah. Hmm.
How can you do this as an
Hmm.
honoring ceremony?
Yeah, in the book I talk about offering a stick of incense as a great way to offer, or lighting a candle, right? Um or even, it doesn't even have to be fire, it can be like a lead candle, as well, because depending on your circumstances, but like even if none of that's possible, we can just imagine. The human imagination is profound and divine, right? And we can use it to get free. Unfortunately, as much as we use it to do the opposite of freedom, as we see, you know.
Well, that
Um,
section is one of the few sections that you actually mentioned chakras, as an
yeah,
energy center using a spiritual word.
yeah,
You're not going, oh,
yeah.
here, invoke this in this energy center of the body. You're actually naming it. So how does that correlate to internally then when we're
Mhm.
activating this element of fire?
Yeah, I think this it's working with the solar plexus, which is the third chakra around the navel, right? For of course, that's the center of a lot of heat. That's our digestive system, right? And again, a lot of our digestive systems are really cold right now, and we have to heat it up. And I think some of these practices, particularly visualization practices, are really important. The same way that I was trained in like Vedic traditions and tantric traditions to really start imagining fire, the navel and the solar plexus, it really has a deep impact on our physical health, right? But that's real work. The chakras are real, but I think sometimes we get too woo woo about it, and I just wanted, you point out something in the book that like I really resisted kind of spiritual language, and I wanted to make things a little more concrete because I wanted people to understand,
Yeah.
like how these things worked, not just using a dogmatic word and just assuming that people knew what it was. But that comes from having a really good editor who was not necessarily a spiritual practitioner, who was like, I don't know what you're talking about. You have to break this down. I'm really grateful for that, you know. So this is for people. I'm inviting people into serious practice with this book, not necessarily talking to people who already have a practice, but I want to bridge this gap,
Yeah.
between our world and the world of people who don't necessarily center this kind of work right now, but they can,
No, it's
you
great. My 14-year-old daughter has been
know.
flicking through your book,
Yeah,
and she said, I'm gonna read this book because
yeah,
like sometimes you say things and I don't know what you're talking about, even though she's been exposed to it since she was born. And she's like,
yeah,
no, and I'm like, good. That's awesome. That's exactly what good because
yeah,
it'll be great. And even my husband, now he's not as he doesn't always question, but um but still there's times when he's like, what do you mean by
yeah,
you know, the truth is going to be revealed.
exactly. And we know what that means because that's how we talk. But like, and then people hear that outside of our communities, they're like, oh, whatever.
Yeah. Yeah, right. I know,
Yeah.
I know. Well, so just finally, you have this one chapter earlier in the book on work, right? Now that we're talking
Yeah.
work, and you've got it spelled
Mhm,
WERK as
mhm,
well as the
mhm,
traditional spelling.
mhm.
So what do those two mean? What's the difference?
Yeah, work and work with a snap, right?
Hmm.
And that
Yeah.
comes really out of like Black gay culture, right? When you're working the regular RO, RK, I mean, I'm sorry, WORK, that means just like practice. Like that's how we meet the world, just like through this really engaged way, But when we talk about having to really cut through shit,
Yeah.
That's when you get into WERK, work. You have
Mhm.
to snap
Yeah,
through it. That
that's
means
right.
that like there's a kind of fierceness that
Yes.
we have to like get into, and that's uncomfortable for some of us. That means that sometimes we may have to fight through something. Like we have to get serious. We have to get direct. We have to tell the truth, even though we know the truth is going to be difficult for people. That's the WERK, work, right? You have to just like get in there and get dirty and cut through things, right? So different type, just two different modes of working, right? I think to get free, we have to do the work with the snap, right? Like you have to get real fierce in the same way Harriet has taught over and over again. Like you have to get real, you have to tell the truth and get real serious about this, right? You have to upgrade, right?
Yeah. Yeah, totally. That's exactly what it's about. Yeah, upgrading. Well, thank you. I mean, this has been
Yeah.
awesome. I could just go on. Don't- you know,
Yeah.
there's so many good things. You talk about the deities and your deity practice and being drawn to Ganesh, and
Yeah.
like he's an awesome deity, and
Absolutely.
yeah, totally. And Tara. I mean, I've
Yep.
had crazy experiences with Tara about 8 years ago.
Ooh.
It was very unexpected.
Yeah.
I literally was in this heat of like, I actually am working with her currently, actually the last
Yeah.
started working with her last couple of days because I'm gonna have Chandra Easton on.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, to
Yeah.
talk about her new Tower book. So
That's right.
yeah, I was really feeling her coming back into my space, and I'm
Yeah.
excited to look at the way she's interpreting the
Yeah.
21 emanations of Tara in
Yeah.
that particular book. But this practice I had about 8 years ago was really intense. It was over about 3 days where I became very sick suddenly. I was in this sort of stupor of like almost hallucination and kept
Yeah.
seeing green Tara actually, and
Yeah.
then her yantra as well, and then I had returned from India where I had actually bought
Mhm.
this mala, which is in
Mm.
colored. It's actually colored sapphires.
Oh,
At the time,
wow.
I was like, "Oh, that's quite fancy," and
Hmm.
but I was really drawn to it. I didn't wear it. I was like, "I'm
Hmm.
not wearing it," but I know it's the time will come, and I put it on my altar. And then after this experience with her, I was like, oh, this is for you. This is to do the work with you because it represents the colors in here of the 21 versions of
Yeah.
Tara. But interestingly, right now I'm working with Tara in her form of the one of the 10 great mothers in the Dasha Mahavidyas.
Yeah.
So it's a
Hmm.
different energy, right? She's more like
Yes.
Uttara Tara. She's more aggressive, kind of like Kali,
Yeah.
and this
Yeah.
this this fear or
Hmm.
wrathfulness, right, to her,
Hmm.
but it's wrathful love. And you talk about wrath in your book as well, which I thought was awesome the way you break that
Yeah.
down. So anyway, maybe you can quickly break that down, and then anything else you want to add after that.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. Breaking down the wrath.
Yeah, wrath. Like,
Hmm.
what does
Hmm.
that
Yeah.
mean? We have these
Absolutely.
wonderful, wrathful deities in many
Hmm.
traditions,
Hmm.
but people don't necessarily
Yeah.
realize. You see their
Yeah.
form in the
Yeah.
tankas, if you've been to the Rubin Museum or
Yeah.
the Met or anywhere else where they have these
Hmm.
beautiful images,
Hmm.
uh, they can look quite scary
Oh,
and
yeah.
oh my gosh, like what's going
Yeah.
on here? But that's
Yeah.
that's just that's not really what they represent.
Exactly. And those were the images that drew me into Tantra. Like that, I respond to wrathful energy. And what wrathful energy really is compassion, right? And then when I talk about work, work is like it's the fierceness is compassion. It's like I'm doing this to get free and to help others get free from something, right? I think wrath is misread as violence or as anger or rage, when in fact, like direct compassion is really intense because we're again, direct compassion is about telling the truth. It's about telling the truth that we don't want to deal with, like that one thing. And it can be as simple as someone saying, you know what, you know, maybe you shouldn't like talk so much. you know, like something, and that's I use that as a personal example because the teacher told me that once, and I thought it was the meanest thing anyone could ever say. I was so pissed off. And then after about a good 2 weeks, I cooled down and realized that I was actually using my speech in a really like harmful way. Like I was going through a lot of suffering and I was weaponizing that by talking shit about people behind their backs. And my teacher said, you need to cut it out. And I was like, how dare you? right? But that's what I needed to hear. But wrath is just simple as that. It's the truth that needs to be told because you know someone is suffering and they need to hear that. Maybe it's like, well, it's pointing out someone's addictions,
Mhm.
like it's pointing out someone's particular behavior. And you know that if you say it, you may not actually be in a relationship with that person anymore, but they have to see it. And you know 100% that it has to be said, right? And of course, receiving that feels painful because we don't want to deal with that truth.
Yeah.
And that's it. That's wrath. And so when we look at this iconography, these wrathful beings, they look like demons and monsters, and they're covered in blood and and
Cutting
human
off
body
heads,
parts.
yes, or severed heads or
Yes,
holding
severed.
severed
Yeah,
heads. Yeah.
yeah. It's just like no, they're like this is reflecting the fierceness that we have to cut through. We're cutting through ego, and we think that our bodies are who we are. And it's not. Like you're much more than a body. Right? So if your body is ripped apart, you don't just disappear, you know? Like there's an essential being or an essential experience still present, right?
Yeah.
And that's what these wrathful beings, that's the ultimate truth these wrathful beings are trying to get us to understand. Like you have to remember that you're more than bodies and identities and the relative, that you're this consciousness that's expansive and pure and awakened, right? Stop holding on to the body. Stop holding on to the phenomenal world as if it's real. Like
Yeah.
that's creating our suffering. Even going back to the very, very beginning, of our talk, it's like getting back to this truth, right? That like we're more than our bodies, you know? And that's why I love the wrathful beings so much because they
Yeah.
just tell you the truth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. They just cut to the chase, don't they? They're like,
Yeah.
mm-mm, this is what you need to look at. This is what you
Yeah.
need to do this. And here's how
Yeah.
you need to feel into that.
Yeah. And it's going to be painful, but that's part of it.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Oh, is there anything you would like to share? I thought that the wrathful beings really helped you get in touch with your body because you had your own
Absolutely.
that section at the
Hmm.
back. But yeah, is there anything else that you would really love to share or have people know about your book?
I would just, just say as people think about reading the book, just to take your time. I think this kind of transmission may be unfamiliar to many folks, and just to go easy, right? And to sit with it. Let the book accompany you. Because this is really a journey that you're starting. I'm not just saying that because it's my book, but I think that this is a real journey that I'm inviting you into, right? And just be prepared for that.
Yes, yes, I would agree with that. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a beautiful. You're holding the reader's hand actually quite
Exactly.
gently so
Yeah.
that, and you're leading them through step by step, and
Mhm,
they don't have to, you don't have to do the practices in any
mhm.
order, specific
Yep.
order. You can do it
Right.
as if it resonates at this
Mhm.
moment, but I felt you are very much present there.
Yeah.
Like you can really hear your tone of voice. You can really hear you there. I'm
Mhm.
here for you. It's okay. Like
Yeah.
I love you and I'm here for you
Mhm.
and it's okay.
Mhm.
Just try. See
Yeah.
what happens.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's how
Exactly.
it feels. Yeah. So amazing. Beautiful. I love it. So great.
Oh, thank
Yeah.
you.
This was so much fun. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. I know you have a super busy schedule, so I really, really appreciate you taking the time to.
Yeah. I appreciate this as